welcome to JudgeCast. This is episode 2 of our brand new series of YouTube videos focusing on how to become a level 1 judge. My name is Bryan Charles, and I am joined this afternoon, evening, morning drive to work by the one and only Charles Feather.
Hello, hello.
And Marco Sanchez.
Hello, everybody.
In this continuing series, we're going to cover an important aspect that will appear on your level 1 test as you work to earn your level 1 Magic Judge certification, card types. But before we dive into that, let's talk about our sponsor for this video series.
That's right. We would like to send a huge thank you and shout out to our sponsor for both this episode and this series, Judge Foundry. Judge Foundry is a membership-based nonprofit organization serving the U.S. and Canada in providing certifications for tabletop gaming officials. They manage everything to do with obtaining and maintaining your certification, and provide educational resources like this one to ensure that every Judge Foundry certified judge has the knowledge and skills to be successful. When it comes to running Magic events at your local game store or at a larger international convention, Judge Foundry is a great resource for you to certify your skills. For more information on Judge Foundry, visit judgefoundry.org and click on the orange Become a Judge button to find out how you can earn your level. The link is in the description below. Now, on to today's topic.
This episode will expand on the rules around card types. Here we will focus on what a level 1 judge working F&M or scheduled events at a larger event should know. Not every corner of types is explored, but if you wish to go deeper or explore topics faster than those videos that come out, you can explore our extensive library at judgecast.com or search us in your podcast app of choice. Our podcasts are typically at least 1 hour, so you'll get both more detailed discussion, humor, insight, and of course, our melodious intonations.
Okay, let's get started. So first off, we want to note that there is a hierarchy of types. There are super types, types, and subtypes. We're going to break this episode up because if we go over all types, it's going to be too long. So we're going to be talking about permanent types in this episode, and then in part 2, we're going to finish up with the rest of the types, and then super types, and then rules around type changing. So the permanent types, which are objects that can exist on the battlefield, are artifact, battle, creature, enchantment, land, planeswalker. In part 2, we're going to cover dungeon, instant, sorcery, kindred, all the super types, and the type changing rules. We are not covering conspiracy, phenomenons, planes, schemes, and vanguards because they are not on the L1 test. In fact, we're not covering battles either because that's not on the L1 test. However, if you want to know more about those types, check out the links below this episode for our podcast episodes on these types where we go into more detail than you probably want to know.
So, Magic uses types to control when objects can be cast, what happens to them when they resolve, and what they do. For example, instants and sorceries go to the graveyard when they resolve, but creatures go onto the battlefield as a permanent. Or simple things like you cannot cast a land card. They can also be used as part of the instructions of a resolving ability like destroy target artifact, or creature cards in your hand can be cast as though they had flash.
Objects can have multiple types. You can have artifact creature or enchantment lands, but some combinations are incompatible due to other rules, like artifact sorcery. And to make things more complicated, types can have subtypes. Subtypes are typically tied to a specific type and provide distinctions within the type. It's what makes goblins different from soldiers and ores different from rooms. If a card has multiple types, each of those types can have their own distinct subtypes. For example, Dryad Arbor, it is both a land forest and a creature dryad, but at no time is it actually a creature forest.
That would be weird.
So now we're going to get into the actual permanent types. These are cards that can exist on the battlefield, and if you cast as a spell, will resolve as a permanent. The rules refer to them as permanent cards when they're in your hand or in the library, permanent spells when they're on the stack, and then permanents on the battlefield. Note, you can't actually cast lands, we'll cover that. But if a spell says destroy target permanent, it cannot target a permanent spell on the stack, or it cannot cause you to discard a permanent card in your hand.
So let's start off with our first permanent type, which is artifacts. Artifacts can only be cast during your main phase when the stack is empty. Now, we're going to be saying this a lot in this episode. In fact, most of these will have this on them. And so we're just going to shortcut this phrase to at sorcery speed with big air quotes around it. Now, artifact spells, they're typically going to be colorless, but not always. Nowadays, we do have a lot more color in artifacts than we used to in the past because colorless artifacts like to break the game. But other types may have special rules that are tied to their types. Most of the artifacts' rules are tied up in the rules around their subtypes.
Most of the rules around artifacts are tied to the equipment subtype. Equipment, which typically will have an ability that allows you to attach the artifact to a creature, and often grants an ability or augments the creature in some way. Most equipment has the equip keyword that allows the controller of the equipment to attach it to a creature that they control. Otherwise, the equipment will specify how it becomes attached to things, sometimes by sacrificing something, for instance. Note that equipment that loses the subtype equipment can't equip a creature. If it is equipped and stops being an equipment, it becomes unattached. Equipment that is also a creature can't equip a creature unless that equipment has the reconfigure ability. Equipment can't equip itself or more than one creature.
That'd be weird having two creatures holding onto the same sword running down.
I mean,
All
I
right.
can picture it, but it's not great.
Teamwork.
Yep. Okay, here's the thing about equipment that sometimes is a little hard to get your head around. The equipment's controller is separate from the equipped creature's controller. You normally equip onto creatures you control, but things can change as the game goes on. Changing control of the creature doesn't change control of the equipment. This is important because some equipment has abilities and some give abilities to the equipped creature. For example, Wrench gives the equipped creature an ability. 3 and tap target creature. And it has its own activated ability of 2 sacrifice Wrench, draw a card. If you equip Bear Cub with Wrench, and then an opponent gains control of the cub, they control the cub, and that tap ability the Wrench grants it. However, you are still controlling the Wrench, so you can sacrifice the Wrench to draw a card. You also can activate the equip ability. If an effect attempts to put an equipment card onto the battlefield attached to an object it can't legally equip, the equipment does enter the battlefield, it just doesn't attach to anything.
Nice. Now I'm just envisioning a bear cub swinging a wrench around, and that's kind of awesome. I'm not going to lie. Anyways.
As well, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, that's a deadly bear cub, as they should be. So moving on to the next artifact subtype that we're going to talk about that also has a lot of rules attached to it. We're going to talk about vehicles. Most vehicles have a crew ability, which allows them to become artifact creatures. Now these cards will have a printed power and toughness, but that doesn't matter unless it's a creature through some other effect. Usually that's going to be through crewing, but you can get creative and find other ways to make it a creature. Now, if a vehicle becomes a creature somehow, it will immediately have its printed power and toughness. However, other effects, like the one that makes it a creature in the first place, may modify or set those values to something else that's much more specific.
Now, there are some types that seem like they should have rules that don't exactly. Clue, food, treasure, blood are all artifact subtypes and are tied to abilities. But they don't exactly. Gaining the subtype treasure does not give you the ability to sacrifice for mana. However, clue, food, treasure, etc. are defined in the rules as predefined tokens that are created with their associated ability. So turning an artifact into a treasure will not necessarily give it the ability to sack for mana, but creating a treasure token will always create an object with that ability. This is why all cards that turn something into food give it the food ability.
Mostly for flavor reasons, yep. All right.
Flavor.
Next up, yeah, flavor on food, right? Next up, creatures. Creatures make up a huge part of the game, and it's the most iconic card type. There's even a whole phase, the combat phase, dedicated to them, which we're going to cover in another episode. But as it pertains to the type and the rules around creature types, it's actually pretty simple. A player who has priority can cast creatures at sorcery speed, and when a creature spell resolves, its controller puts it on the battlefield under their control, and it becomes a permanent on the battlefield. There are some abilities, such as Bestow and Mutate, that can change these rules.
There are also creature subtypes. These are often referred to as creature types in the rules. Creatures may have anywhere from 0 to many or even all creature types. So creature is a type, but goblin is a creature type, which is also just a subtype of the card type creature. Creatures are predominantly defined by their role in combat, and every creature has power and toughness. Power is the amount of damage that the creature will deal in combat, and toughness is the amount of damage needed to destroy it. Power and toughness are calculated by starting with the numbers that are on the card, and then applying any applicable continuous effects, which we'll discuss when we get to our layers episode. But for example, on screen you'll see Giant Growth, which says target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. That's how we can modify that creature's power and toughness.
Damage dealt to a creature by a source is marked on that creature. There are some keyword exceptions like Wither or Infect. If the total damage marked on the creature is greater than or equal to its toughness, that creature has been dealt lethal damage. Arena shows damage marked on a creature as a reduction in its toughness. This is not what actually happens, which is why we point it out. Creatures can attack and block as a part of combat.
If a creature has an activated ability with the tap symbol, that ability can't be activated unless the creature started the turn on your side. It can't attack either. This is colloquially called summoning sickness. Okay, that doesn't mean the creature can't be tapped by other abilities. So you can cast a Llanowar Elf, and if you do, you cannot immediately tap it for mana, but you can use the crew ability of Smuggler's Copter to tap that Llanowar Elf. So it's summoning sick in terms of not being able to attack, but it can get in a little Smuggler's Copter and then go fly overhead.
Seems sweet. Our next card type is Enchantment. Now, enchantments can be cast at sorcery speed, starting to sound familiar, and enchantment spells will resolve into permanents that exist on the battlefield. Enchantments have subtypes and are called enchantment types, just like creatures have creature types. Nearly all of the special rules around enchantments are tied to their subtypes. Let's dive into those.
Auras are an original gangster enchantment subtype. They've been around forever. When they enter the battlefield, they enter attached to an object or player. They can only attach to something defined by its enchant keyword ability. Aura spells are unique in that they require a target, and that target has to match their enchant keyword ability.
If an aura somehow enters the battlefield, or enters now, other than being cast, and the effect doesn't say what it's being attached to, the aura's controller gets to choose what it attaches to. This lets you get auras onto creatures with hexproof or shroud. The choice has to be legal though, and if there are no legal choices, the aura stays where it is. If an aura is attempting to enter from the stack and its target isn't there, it's going to go to the graveyard instead. The choice has to be legal though, and if there are no legal choices, the aura stays where it is. For example, if I cast Sunblessed Healer with its kicker ability, and it resolves, you can target your Daybreak Coronet in the graveyard, but it cannot attach to the Sunblessed Healer because the Sunblessed Healer does not have another aura attached to it. So the Daybreak Coronet will stay where it is, even though it was targeted. Okay. Also, if the aura is attempting to enter the battlefield from the stack, where it was just cast, and the target wasn't there, it's going to go to the graveyard instead.
The aura is going to enchant the permanent or player it is attached to. If the object or player no longer exists or no longer matches the enchant ability, the aura is going to fall off as a state-based action and goes to the graveyard. So for example, if I gain control of your land that is enchanted with Crackling Emergence would fall off because you still control Crackling Emergence, but not the land, and therefore it no longer enchants a land you control.
Let's talk about roles just briefly, because they are important. Roles are colorless enchantment tokens that are essentially enchant creature auras with an additional state-based action associated with them. The state-based action is, if a permanent has more than one role attached to it controlled by the same player, put all of them in the graveyard except the one with the most recent timestamp. This state-based action limits you to one role per permanent, no more.
The next enchantment subtype that we're going to talk about is sagas. Each saga has a combination of chapter symbols and their related effects. Chapter symbols are really keywords that represent a triggered ability, called a chapter ability, that generates the associated effect. When a saga enters, you put a lore counter on it. This first counter is not a trigger, all right? These lore counters track what chapter you're on. So if you go up to chapter 1, you're on chapter 1. You put a second counter on, you go to chapter 2. You add a lore counter as a turn-based action when your first main phase begins. This feels a lot like a trigger, but these aren't triggers either. It's a turn-based action, and players cannot respond to adding a counter. They can respond to the trigger that is generated from increasing the lore counters. So, for example, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, when you go up to 2 lore counters, it says you may discard up to 2 cards. If you do, draw that many cards. While you cannot respond to putting the second lore counter on, you can respond to the trigger of the discarding of the cards. When you add the lore counter, you get the next chapter ability. If you are able to add multiple lore counters at once, you get all the chapter abilities that you pass through as well. So if you were somehow able to skip up to 3, you're going to get them all, minus the read ahead ability, which we're going to talk about in a later episode.
When a saga has lore counters on it that are equal to or greater than the number of the final chapter, it's going to get sacrificed as a state-based action. However, the rules wait until the associated trigger resolves or otherwise leaves the stack. Now, this does create a small window where a player can reduce the number of lore counters while the final ability is on the stack and avoid the sacrifice until next time. So let's say, for example, Urza's Saga has its 3rd chapter ability. I have my trigger that says search your library for an artifact card with mana value 0 or 1, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. I can then interact by removing a counter from that permanent, and then after my ability resolves, it checks and sees an Urza's Saga with only 2 chapter abilities. Now, a saga with no chapter abilities has a final chapter number of 0. That means no matter how many counters are on the saga, state-based actions are going to put it into the graveyard. Urza's Saga knows this very well because Blood Moon is a card.
Let's talk about the class subtype. Class enchantments look a lot like sagas, but are very different. For starters, the art is on the other side, but the fun doesn't stop there. Each class card contains 2 class level bars. Each class level bar is really a keyword ability that has 2 abilities.
The first is an activated ability that allows the class to become the appropriate level. You can only activate the class for the next level. So a level 1 class can go to level 2 and has to go to level 2 before it can go to 3. You can't skip class. The second ability is, and this is in quotes, as long as this class is level N or greater, it has the ability associated with that class level. It could be a static ability or a triggered ability. All right. First level's free. It's just printed on the card. You don't have to pay anything to get there. It's not technically tied to a level. All right. A level is a designation any permanent can have. Okay. If the class stops being a class and starts being a creature, it still keeps its level and any level abilities that it gained from reaching that level. So if it goes back to being a class, it will still have its level.
Now it's time to crack the case of the case subtype for enchantments. Now, cases look a lot like classes, but they are different mechanically. They have a static ability that you get for free. And then they have two other abilities. The first that represents how to quote unquote solve the case, and then also what you get for solving it, which will typically be mentioned as solved ability.
The to solve ability is a triggered ability that triggers at the beginning of your end step and checks to see if the solve condition is true. If true, your case becomes solved. Then the solved ability becomes active or relevant to you. Solved is just a designation a card can have. It's not copyable, but the permanent stays solved if it becomes something else, even another case.
All right, next up is the subtype room, which don't even know why we're calling it out. There's actually no rules text tied to the subtype of room. All the rules that you think are tied to rules are actually tied to split permanents, which is something different, or would be different if there were more split permanents than just rooms. However, we're going to cover split permanents in the odds and end episode much later in this series.
All right, moving right along to our next card type, we're going to talk about Planeswalkers. A player who has priority may cast a Planeswalker card from their hand during a main phase on their turn when the stack is empty, or sorcery speed. When a Planeswalker spell resolves, its controller puts it onto the battlefield under their control, and it gains loyalty counters equal to the number in the lower right-hand corner. The Planeswalker type has an intrinsic ability that says this permanent enters with a number of loyalty counters on it equal to its printed loyalty number.
Each Planeswalker has some number of loyalty abilities, which are represented by a loyalty symbol and a cost in it. This is the cost to activate the ability. The cost is most likely adding or removing a loyalty counter, but it is still a cost. Loyalty abilities can be activated at sorcery speed and only once per turn per permanent with the loyalty abilities. Planeswalker subtypes are called Planeswalker types, and they can have multiple subtypes, but they usually don't.
Finally, and this is a thing for people that have been playing for a long time, but maybe not getting into being a judge and paying super close attention to the rules, there used to be this thing called the Planeswalker redirection rule. It's old. It doesn't exist anymore. Don't worry about it. Beyond knowing that if your card can deal damage to permanents or players and it's old, you might want to check the Gatherer text to see if it's been errataed to also hit Planeswalkers. For example, Lightning Bolt, in some of its reprintings in the middle years, say Lightning Bolt deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Currently, it says Lightning Bolt deals 3 damage to any target. Okay. Planeswalkers can also be attacked the same way as you attack players, and any damage dealt to Planeswalkers removes that many loyalty counters. And if a Planeswalker's loyalty is 0, it gets put into the graveyard as a state-based action. And this doesn't happen just with combat, all right? Depending on the ability that removes loyalty counters, this may actually mean that the Planeswalker is put into the graveyard before the loyalty ability resolves, because removing the loyalty abilities is a cost that you pay, and then you put the ability on the stack, so the Planeswalker could be at 0 before its ability resolves.
All right, now let's get to our first permanent type that does have some weird timing rules and restrictions. So unlike our other permanents so far, lands are not spells. You do not and cannot cast a land. A player who has priority may, quote-unquote, play a land from their hand during a main phase of their turn when the stack is empty. But, importantly, this action does not use the stack. This is what's called a special action. You just put it onto the battlefield. Opponents cannot respond to it with any instance or activated abilities. If you have priority and you decide you want to play a land, bam, a land appears and there's nothing they can do about it. And you can normally only play one land during your turn. Some card effects can change that though. If you want to know how many lands you still can play this turn, count up any of the effects that let you play additional lands and add 1 to it. That's your land play for the turn. Now, if you've played less lands than that total number that you just calculated, you can keep playing more lands.
You can't play a land for any reason if it is not your turn. If a land card is also a creature or an artifact, you still can't cast it. It follows all the rules for playing a land and the restrictions it has. Some effects let you put a land card onto the battlefield. This is not the same as playing a land. When looking at effects that let you play cards, pay attention if the card says play the card or cast the card. Emberheart Challenger lets you play a land. Ragavan does not.
Just like creatures can have subtypes, enchantments can have subtypes, planeswalkers can have subtypes, lands have subtypes. They're called land types. All right. There's a special set of land types that are called basic land types. Those are plains, islands, swamps, mountains, and forests. If something uses the phrase basic land type, it's referring to one of those land types. All right. The card with that land type, though, doesn't have to be basic itself. Get it? A basic land type does not need to be on a basic land. All right. Make that a little clear. Witch's Cottage has a basic land type, but is not a basic land, while Wastes is a basic land, but does not have a basic land type. Clear as mud.
Now, lands have a special rule
Another one?
on if their type changes. Yes, lands are very, very special, boys and girls. If you set a land's subtype to one of the basic land types, the land is going to lose all of its previous land types and all of its old abilities, and only gains the mana ability that is associated with the basic land type that is now newly on the card. However, as an exception, if that card effect says it gains a land type in addition to its own, then it will keep all of its old text and then just staples on the new effect. So, for example, Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, is a legendary land that says each land is a forest in addition to its other land types. So if Bryan controls a whole bunch of swamps and I play Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, now all of his swamps are now swamp forests and can tap for black or green mana. Whereas Blood Moon simply says non-basic lands are mountains, period. That gets rid of any previous mana abilities that these lands had and just makes them mountains that say tap for red mana. Now, if you're curious about how these two cards work together, check out our Layers episode because that's a lot longer than we have time for right now.
Clearly, Blood Moon is the superior land.
Sure. Amulet player here disagrees, but go on.
No, you. It's our closing.
Oh, yeah, it is. All right. Well, once again, we would like to thank Judge Foundry for their support in sponsoring this series for helping you earn your level 1 certification. Make sure to visit judgefoundry.org and click on the orange Become a Judge button to learn how you could join the Magic judging community in the US and Canada and earn your certification with Judge Foundry.
And if you want to reach us, we have our own Discord server for judges new and old, fans, and anyone who supports the judging community. The invite link to our Discord server is in the description below, as well as our JudgeCast and individual social media links. If you're a fan of our content, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel and ring that bell to be notified when new videos in this series are posted, or when a new episode of our full podcast is released. Make sure to check out our playlists for a complete playlist of this entire series, as well as Learn to Judge playlists with episodes from JudgeCast's history focusing on helping you become a better judge. And you can find everything relating to JudgeCast at judgecast.com. With that, I'm Charles Featherer, and I keep it fair.
I'm Marcos Sanchez, and I keep it fun.
And I'm Bryan Perlman, and I still keep my abilities even if I'm turned into a mountain.